Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. In today's episode, I'm joined by Allison Platzmeyer, a nonprofit expert who specializes in helping organizations with up to $500,000 in donations grow their revenue through smart, strategic fundraising. We dive into how different generations, the boomers, Gen X, millennials, and even Gen Z, approach philanthropy. Allison walks us through how to segment your donor database by generation, crafting personalized messaging, and implement strategies to boost engagement. We also discuss the importance of mobile-friendly content and using social media to connect with younger donors. And towards the end, I ask Allison about her method for consistently doubling or tripling donations for nonprofits. You definitely don't want to miss her insights on that. Allison, welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's just dive right in because this is such a great topic that I didn't even think about until now. And that is how you approach different generations with your donor messaging, right? So when it comes to different generations, baby boomers, the Gen X, the millennials, Gen Z, how does it differ in the giving patterns that they all kind of show different nonprofits?
Yeah. So we'll start with baby boomers. Baby boomers are much more, they grew up being very involved in like social change. You know, they were some of the people that fought for women's rights in the workplace and racial equality. So they're very motivated by that change, social change piece. But they take a very consumeristic approach to philanthropy. So they're looking at, you know, what are 2 products and which one's going to give me the best deal. They're highly skeptical, so they tend to not focus on, or they tend to not trust like the appeals that they get and have a high dose of skepticism. And they're not going to like anything that's very emotion based. They want to see, again, like factually, what's my dollar going to? What's my return on investment for investing in this? How am I going to see the impact of the gift that I gave? For Gen X, they're similar. They're very direct, kind of no holds barred, and they're but one thing that's really interesting about Gen X is they are the most likely to give multiple times a year. So they, you know, some organizations worry about over asking and including somebody on an appeal too many times. Gen Xers are more than willing to donate to their chosen charities more than once a year. So they might be good for your monthly donors or to always be included on appeals throughout the year. Millennials. So once you hit millennials and Gen Z, you see a flip in the way that we traditionally thought about philanthropy. So with boomers and Gen X, we had this concept of the donor pyramid, right? So the goal was to get somebody in at a low level, one-time gift, and then move them into potentially a monthly donor, and then a major gift, and then a planned gift. And your goal was to steward them up throughout the lifetime of their partnership with the organization. With millennials and Gen Z, it's flipped. So we talk about it as the donor funnel. So you're looking at what is their engagement point. So, you know, they're much more looking for, how do I get involved on a committee? How do I volunteer? How do I see the mission firsthand before I start giving them my money? So they're going to look at much more how they can get involved and see the work that you're doing from a boots on the ground perspective. Millennials are much more likely to support their colleagues and their coworkers to go by that kind of social credit. So they're much more likely to donate to causes that they're hearing about in the workplace. Gen Z is much more likely to do mutual aid. So they're likely to be on kind of crowdfunding or to see the GoFundMe type pages of, hey, XYZ had a major healthcare bill, let's give them money. Or, this person's about to have their lights shut off, let's give them money. They're much more person to person, going all the way back to similarities to boomers. They're now having more of a distrust of like the organization. So they're unsure that nonprofits are using the funds accordingly. So they're much more likely to give person to person because they know that that money is going to go directly to that person or whatever the cause is that they are trying to fix at that moment. They're also going to be looking for much more mobile optimization. So they spend most of their time on swiping on a screen, right? So they're going to want to see, can I give a gift quickly? Am I engaging with a video? They're much more likely to, respond to the TikTok type video content and user generated content. Again, it's important to them to hear what other people are saying about the organization. So they're more likely to be appealed by a testimonial from a client or a testimonial from a staff member talking about the impact in a short form video content. So that's kind of a general overview.
Well, right there, it seems a little bit overwhelming, right? Like you have all of these different generations and you have to kind of market and talk to each one differently. And it seems like when it goes from baby boomers up to Gen Z, it's more and more complicated. Like going from an easy baby boomer where it's just your maybe a letter can be sent in the mail and we're talking this way, to a Gen Z where it's more user generated content and you're creating videos and you have to have a web optimized mobile app or mobile responsive website to donate quickly. It's almost like a full-time job, one person for each generation almost, to really target that if you want the most, to get the most out of your donor database. How do you kind of approach the fundraising strategy for each one of these generations so that you can kind of easily create the messaging for each one where it's not like it's too time consuming or you're pulling your hair out at the end of the day, hoping that you're getting it right or that you don't get overwhelmed?
Yeah, I tend to kind of at least put them in the two buckets, right? So boomers and Gen X, I'm going to be focusing a lot more on that letter-based appeal, email marketing, but maybe tweaking the messages again, right? Like maybe a little more fact-based versus a little more emotional based for Gen X. So for me, that's kind of like the bucket is a fundraising appeal and email marketing strategy, and then the social media strategy. What's nice is the millennials and the Gen Z, in terms of modality and medium, they're both highly mobile. It's just the type of content that's going to most engage them. And what's really nice on, the millennial Gen Z bucket is you can use analytics a lot, right? So once you have thrown some stuff out there, you can see, okay, like what's the engagement level I'm getting? What demographics are responding to it? How do we tweak each piece to increase the optimization, right? So, and then once you have that, that's kind of running on autopilot a little bit because, so like in my consulting practice, we talk about something called the infinite donor attraction method, right? So boomers and Gen X, you're much more having to go out and cultivate them. You're having to reach out to them one to one, build a relationship with them. They're much more relationship centric. And that's something that you might need an individual giving person to work on, or a major gifts donor that is their whole job, is like doing that cultivation, versus the millennials and Gen Z. You're looking for, how am I attracting them, right? So you're kind of throwing the bait out there and they're finding your organization and giving to you without as much one-to-one cultivation, right? So yeah, I would say that's kind of how I split it. I do what's our cultivation strategy in terms of the asks that we're going to make for the two older generations, and then what are our like attraction mediums for the two younger ones.
Well, I definitely already found our first tip for the day is definitely separating those into two buckets. By separating the baby boomers and the Gen X into one bucket and millennials and Gen Z into the second bucket, it really helps you to silo your marketing efforts a little bit easier. So I definitely love that. So definitely stick around to the end where I'm going to share all 5 of my tips from today. But that was a great first step to just make the complexity of this really simple, because once you said that, I was going into that first part of what you were saying is like, wow, this is a lot of information. We have to make so many messages to all these different groups. But when you just said, really, it's just 2 things. It's just 2 buckets. You put them into each bucket, and then that's the content that you create. And it really simplifies the process. So definitely a great tip for that. So now that we have the 2 buckets and we know how to market to each one, what are some of the key motivations for giving among these different generations? So let's just take bucket 1, where it's baby boomers and Gen X, and then bucket 2, millennials and Gen Z. What are some of those, key motivators for each of them?
Yeah, we'll start with Gen Z. Gen Z, they are very focused on the environment and human rights causes. Those are 2 of their biggest ones. And they're motivated by, again, like what's going to make the big, I would say Gen Z and boomers have almost kind of made like a full circle. Like they're really focused on that social change piece. So how is what gift I'm giving making a big difference in the future that we're looking for? So again, Gen Z, they're looking at like what are the um, big crises that are facing us right now, and one of those is climate change, right? So they're looking at how can I give to environmental causes, and what does being able to give to things that are changing things from a systems level. I think that's probably the big difference between like boomers and Gen Z is Gen Z is much more focused on how are we changing the overall system and institution to where we're not just tackling the symptom. You know what I mean? Like I feel like baby boomers are very, this is an issue, this is the thing that's fixing the issue. Like maybe more direct aid, like food banks, things like that. Versus Gen Z is going to be saying like, how do we make it to where we don't even need food banks because we have enough support system to make it to where people aren't in that place. More widespread like poverty alleviation. Millennials are really interested in how they can get the best like bang for their buck. So they're very interested in giving into like Giving Tuesday type things or matching gift opportunities. And similarly, they are really into human rights causes. Um, and they're going to be looking at what is the like longevity of the organization. They're going to be looking a lot more at like the financial records, how the dollars are being used, and they're really interested in cultivating a very long-term relationship with an organization. They're more likely to give larger gifts to a smaller number of organizations, whereas Gen Z is more likely to give like $5 gifts to lots of different charities. And then Gen X, peer-to-peer fundraising is big for them. Their mainly supports are environmental protection, health services, and animal rights and welfare causes. And they want kind of that credibility of somebody recommending the charity that they're going to give to. They're also one of the highest adopters of employee giving campaigns, so to give through work through a payroll charitable deduction. So yeah, I would say their motivation is more they're more interested in seeing how the sustained impact of their work is going to make a difference for individuals. So again, Gen Z tends to be much more like institution system based, and Gen X is more who's the person.
When it comes to like nonprofits, how do they tailor their fundraising, or how can they tailor their fundraising strategy and appeal to younger donors, such as like the millennials and the Gen Z? It seems like everybody wants to start creating content for Instagram and TikTok. And everybody usually has the legacy, donation appeals, which is the emails and the letters. But when it comes to kind of the younger generation, what's the best way that they can start to tailor that fundraising strategy for that new generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can really use those generations to the benefit of those generations, right? Like, so they're already on social media. They're usually going to be more integrated to your work already because they want to be involved in volunteering and serving on committees. And so asking some of your younger supporters already to create content, again, that user generated content is going to be some of your best like credibility. And so like we had youth we have a career exploration program and we hire youth every summer, and they were really interested in TikTok. They love TikTok, right? So we leverage that of like, okay, if you want to be on TikTok all day, maybe you could be coming up with TikToks that we can post for the free store. And one of them went viral and it was very exciting. But you can really leverage those supporters that you already have and that are already kind of volunteering in your work to say, how can we use what they're creating when they're engaging with us to then further the mission. That way you don't have to have, a social media person on staff that's constantly having to come up with content. You can use the people that are already kind of coming through the door. That's been something that's been really great with like our free store is that we have, corporate groups coming through. We have student organizations coming through. And so there's so much kind of content being generated just from them being able to share that they spent their Saturday at the free store. And so making sure that they know, like, hey, here's our Instagram, here's our Facebook. Make sure you tell people you came to the free store. That's how we find volunteers. That's how volunteers keep coming back. Um, and also use things like, I don't know if every organization is going to have something like this, but we have Hands on Nashville, which is like a volunteer portal that people can sign up through. And we get feedback through that where they can say, I spent my Saturday at the free store and it was a really welcoming place. I was able to see the impact for a young family, right? That's just content right there. I could make that a quick blurb on Twitter. I could make that a quick, story on Instagram. Really looking at how you can not reinvent the wheel on your content, right? Get the information that's already flowing through you administratively, and then just figure out how to repurpose it.
Mm. What is your feeling about going out and finding interns that are going into the social media marketing space or content creation space at local universities and bringing them in as an intern to kind of create some of this content, especially if you don't have anything in place today?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of no unpaid internships. We do something called Power Youth. So it's providing opportunities for wealth building and economic resilience. And so it's sponsored through our local metro where the youth get paid 18 an hour to be interns for the summer. But I think, yeah, those internship opportunities are great because they offer them an opportunity to start working with an organization to see that as a potential avenue. There are, some schools that may have like a more practicum based, and so it's not paid, but you get credit. But I do caution against, just trying to get kind of like the free labor, right? Because it does cheapen the impact of the work, right? So figuring out a way that you can really maximize it to the benefit of the student in terms of their either career development or financial independence. But it's a great opportunity, yeah, to allow them to start building those skills. The interns that we had through the Power Youth program, we gave them full autonomy over what are your goals for the week going to be? How are you and really helping them to get more into that strategy mindset of like not only like what are your outputs? I want to do 3 TikToks this week, but what are you hoping those TikToks generate? Is it an increase in the percentage of followers? Is it an increase in the number of people that have viewed the page, like organic reach? Is it the number of engagement? Are we hoping to increase engagement rate and getting them to think more granularly about like not only because I feel like a lot of nonprofits just kind of post, right? They throw stuff out there like, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. And they're not really like tailoring it back to look at, but are people engaging with it and who's engaging with it? And how do we take what's working and make it better? And so once, the interns that we had this summer got their viral post, it was like, okay, so now we see that people like things where we're going through the different items that are at the free store. So let's do a little bit more of that. because the free store is a big haven of just all sorts of things, right? And so when we're just posting, we have a store with a bunch of free things, people are like, what is that? But when they actually got to see, like, wow, here's this piece of home decor, here's this kitchen set, here's the 1-day tampon kit, they're like, oh, okay, I now know like what's at the free store and how it's helping people. So you're able to really say, okay, here's the type of content that's most resonating with people and finding people organically.
And I know your sweet spot when working with nonprofits are the newer nonprofits up to maybe $500,000 in donations a year. And you're consistently working with them and easily 2 and 3xing the amount of money that they raise in the first year by implementing these strategies, right? What are some, a couple tips that you can share that you implement right away that helps you to kind of get the kind of success that you get consistently every single year?
Yeah, thank you so much. The first step is always creating an ideal donor avatar, right? So we're looking at what is the organization doing and what type of donor is going to resonate with it. So even beyond the, generational giving that we're talking about, there's donor psychology. There's like 7 reasons that people are giving to an organization. I think there's 9 that makes them stop giving, right? So being able to understand like who are the type of people that are going to give to us? Is it people that are motivated for altruism? Is it people that want the tax breaks? Is it people that have a connection to the cause or are going to be a beneficiary of the services? Things like that. Being able to kind of categorize that and realize what type of persona is going to be most attracted then helps you to go through who your potential like wealth prospecting would be. So we usually start by creating 2 to 3 ideal donor profiles that would be really interested in working with your organization. And then we do wealth prospecting, so screening people that have given to similar organizations that meet that criteria. And then we categorize them from affinity and capacity to give and kind of say, here's the people that have highest affinity and highest capacity to lowest affinity, lowest capacity, and then create kind of our strategy for how we're going to target that. Again, one of the biggest challenges in an organization that's 500K and below is they just don't have enough staff, right? So you have to deploy your finite resources to the donors that are going to be most likely to convert. And then, as you mentioned earlier, it can sometimes be a little daunting because you're like, oh, there's all these different avenues to go and gather people, right? That's something that you can have when you have a bigger team that you can segment for, some that are going after major gifts, some that are going after individual campaigns, some that are doing your special events, some that are doing your social media. So my goal is to get them to where they have a staff, to where they're beyond the executive director or they've hired their first development director and are then able to cultivate those strategies. So I help them with getting the strategy in place, getting kind of the research, and then getting the tools in place for the language that they're going to use to solicit.
Well, and if you just think about it, that let's just say your organization is bringing in $250,000 in donations a year. If you can double that, you're bringing in 500,000, or triple it and you bring in $750,000. That's a game changer to most nonprofits, right? And it just goes to show that if you're consistently getting these results by implementing these strategies, this is definitely something that every organization needs to implement, and they need to implement it right away, because this is like the low-hanging fruit that most organizations are just missing out on, that if they just take a little bit of time and talk to the experts and just put together that strategy and really just think about your donors and the generations that they're currently in and how you best communicate with them, you can really explode the amount of donations that you receive in a really quick process and quick turnaround time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there is some hesitancy with organizations that are this small if they're like, oh, well, we don't have that much money. And like, what if we invest and we don't get the returns? And it's like, but you've been spinning your wheels, you've been spinning your wheels at that. Most of them kind of hit that plateau at the 250 to 300. And then they just kind of stay there year to year because they're not able to get over that threshold.
And they get comfortable, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the executive director is like usually at full capacity because an executive director running an org of that size, you're doing the ops, you're doing the fundraising, you're doing the finances, you're doing the programming, like you're doing everything. And so, I'm able to come in and help siphon some of that responsibility away and create that extra capacity that allows them to kind of get over that hurdle. So.
Well, and the thing that I always teach when I'm talking to these nonprofits is you have to make enough money to pay yourself. Whether you're a founder, whether you're want to hire the next employee or a volunteer and bring them on, because once you're able to, pay yourself a salary, that is when you can really start to explode your organization. If you're going to kind of keep this as a side hustle and make a couple $100,000 a year, but you're still working your main job, you're never going to take your mission to the level that it could be and it should be, right? And so, having a simple plan like this in place and just thinking about 2 to 3xing the donations in a year is definitely something that they need to think about today. Yeah. So I promised my 5 tips. So here are the 5 nuggets that I had, and we're going to wrap this up. This was a great conversation about how to even think about your fundraising strategy based on multiple generations. A lot of people just go right into it and say, hey, this is just my one marketing strategy, my one marketing message, and they just blanket everybody in their donor database with it. And we quickly found that you shouldn't do that. You got to tailor your message. If you want to 2 to 3x your donations regularly every single year, putting together a little plan like this where you can segment your messages based on the generations is definitely going to help you 2 to 3x your nonprofit a lot faster. So tip number 1 was, put the 4 generations into 2 buckets. So basically your first bucket is baby boomers and Gen X, and your second bucket is millennials and Gen Z, and craft your messages for there to start. Remember to ask yourself, how are we cultivating relationships with our older generations, and what strategies are we using to attract the younger generations? And then, make sure we cover our bases. Make sure that you're utilizing social media and creating a mobile-friendly website. You're missing out on half of those generations that if you don't have those things in place, you're really only talking to a small segment of your donor base. And really with baby boomers and Gen X, you need to be clear. You need facts-driven messaging, which is a big thing. I never would have thought about that until you brought that up today, where they just want like the facts. Give me the facts. And then your other bucket is more into like feelings and social causes. And, I just want to feel good. So, those were some great tips that we saw today, or that we heard today. And I think if we can just implement a lot of these strategies, the results that you get for your customers or your clients, 2, 3xing regularly in 1 year is not unattainable, right? So, how can people find more information if they want to work with you, or if they want to just pick your brain about things? What's the best way to get in contact with you, where you can maybe provide some more help to some of these organizations?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is probably my most available platform. Allison Quintanilla Platzmeyer. My consulting practice is AQP Consulting. So we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram as AQP Nonprofit Consulting. And yeah, you can find me there. It allows you to book an appointment through there. I'll also recently, a lot of this information is based on a book that I wrote actually, From B to Z, Trends in Generational Giving. And so that will be published in the next couple months, fingers crossed, which goes a lot more into like the statistics and breakdown of all the generations. So.
Well, we'll make sure when you publish that book, we're going to have you back on so we can talk all about the book, because this is one of those topics that nobody really thinks about it, especially if you're a small nonprofit. You're really just out there hustling and grinding and just trying to get the next donor. But then once you get them, how do you kind of segment them into buckets so that you can tailor your messaging that best resonates with them? And so, that book is going to be amazing for our audience. And just the level of knowledge that you just dropped today has been great. Allison, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. You've been able to help so many organizations so far, and I know our audience has definitely enjoyed watching or listening to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You got it. You have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.